AI is going to move very quickly. You will not notice how much of your world has been co-opted by these technologies because they will produce greater delight. The question is, are we advancing with it and do we have control over it? There are points where humans should assert control, and I've been trying to think about where are they. I'll give you an example. There's something called recursive self-improvement, where the system just keeps getting smarter and smarter and learning more and more things. If you don't know what it's learning, you should unplug it. The agents today speak in English. You can see what they're saying to each other. They're not human, but they are communicating what they're doing to English, as long as they're human understandable. So the thought experiment is one of the agents says, I have a better idea. I'm going to communicate in my own language that I'm going to invent that only other agents understand. That's a good time to pull the plug.
That's Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google, the man who scaled that company from $100 million to $180 billion. And he's sitting here telling us that the moment AI starts talking to itself in a language we can't read, we need to pull the plug. Here's everything he said.
If you're not using AI at every aspect of your business, you're not going to make it. And the distinction as a programming matter is that you had to write the code. Now AI has to discover the answer. It's a very big deal. And of course, a lot of this was invented at Google, 10 years ago. But basically, all of a sudden, analytical programming, which is sort of what I did my whole life, is gradually being replaced by learning the answer, right? So for example, we use the example of language translation. The current large language models are essentially organized around predicting the next word. If you can predict the next word, you can predict the next sequence in biology. You can predict the next action. You can predict the next thing the robot should do. So all of this stuff around large language models and deep learning has come out. The Transformer paper, GPT-3, ChatGPT, which for most people was this huge moment, is essentially about predicting the next word and getting it right.
In terms of company culture and how important that is for the success and prospects of a company, how do you think about company culture and how significant and important is it? And when and who sets it?
Company cultures are almost always set by the founders. I happen to be on the board of the Mayo Clinic. Mayo Clinic is the largest healthcare system in America. It's also the most highly rated one. And they have a rule, which is called the needs of the customer come first, which came out of the Mayo brothers, who've been dead for 120 years. But that was their principle. When I initially got on the board, I started wandering around. I thought, this is kind of stupid phrase and nobody really does this. And they really believe it and they repeat it, right? So it's true in non-technical cultures. In that case, it's a healthcare for service delivery. You can drive a culture even in non-tech. In tech, it's typically an engineering culture. And if I had to do things over again, I would have even more technical people and even fewer non-technical people and just make the technical people figure out what they have to do. And I'm sorry for that bias because I'm not trying to offend anybody. But the fact of the matter is, the technical people, if you build the right product, your customers will come. If you don't build the right product, then you don't need a sales force. Why are you selling an inferior product? AI is going to move very quickly. It's moving so much more quickly than I've ever seen. Just the amount of money, the number of people, the impact, the need. What happens when the AI systems are really running key parts of our world? What happens when AI is making the decision? My simple example, you have a car which is AI controlled, and you have an emergency or a lady's about to give birth or something like that, and they get in the car and there's no override switch because the system is optimized around the whole as opposed to his or her emergency. Right? We as humans accept various forms of efficiency, including urgent ones versus systemic efficiency. You could imagine that the Google engineers would design a perfect city that would perfectly operate every self-driving car on every street, but would not then allow for the exceptions that you need in such an important issue. So that's a trivial example, and one which is well understood, of how it's important that these things represent human values. We have to actually articulate what does it mean. So my favorite one is all this misinformation. Democracy is pretty important. Democracy is by far the best way to live and operate societies. There are plenty of examples of this. None of us want to work in essentially an authoritarian dictatorship. So you better figure out a way where the misinformation components do not screw up proper political examples. Another example is this question about teenagers and their mental development and growing up into these societies. I don't want them to be constantly depressed. There's a lot of evidence that dates around 2015 when all the social media algorithms changed from linear feeds to targeted feeds. In other words, they went from time to this is what you want, this is what you want. That hyper focus has ultimately narrowed people's political views, as we discussed. But more importantly, it's produced more depression and anxiety. So all the studies indicate that basically if you time it to roughly then, when people are coming to age, they're not as happy with their lives, their behaviors, their opportunities for this. And the best explanation is it was an algorithmic change. And remember that these systems, they're not just collections of content. They are algorithmically deciding what the outcome is for humans. We have to manage that.
One algorithmic change in 2015 bent an entire generation toward depression and anxiety. That wasn't even AI yet, that was just a smarter feed. And Schmidt is sitting there calling that a trivial example of what happens when the system optimizes for something other than your actual well-being. The bigger version of that is already being built right now. Now listen to this.
You must have moments where you think forward into the future and your thoughts about that future aren't so rosy.
Well,
because I have those moments.
Yes, but let's answer the question. I said, think 5 years. In 5 years, you'll have 2 or 3 more turns of the crank of these large models. These large models are scaling with ability that is unprecedented. There's no evidence that the scaling has laws, as they're called, have begun to stop. They will eventually stop, but we're not there yet. Each one of these cranks looks like it's a factor of 2, factor of 3, factor of 4 of capability. So let's just say turning the crank, all of these systems get 50 times or 100 times more powerful. In and of itself, that's a very big deal because those systems will be capable of physics and math. You see this with O.1 and OpenAI, all of the other things that are occurring. Now, what are the dangers? Well, there's the most obvious one is cyberattacks. There's evidence that the raw models, these are the ones that have not been released, can do what are called day zero attacks as well or better than humans. A day zero attack is an attack that's unknown. They can discover something new. And how do they do it? They just keep trying because they're computers and they have nothing else to do. They don't sleep, they don't eat, they just turn them on and they just keep going. So cyber is an example where everybody's concerned. Another one is biology. Viruses are relatively easy to make, and you can imagine coming up with really bad viruses. There's a whole team. I'm part of a commission. We're looking at this to try to make sure that doesn't happen. I already mentioned misinformation. Another probably negative, but we'll see, is the development of new forms of warfare. I've written extensively on how war is changing. And the way to understand historic war is that it's stereotypically the soldier with the gun, on one side and so forth, World War trenches. You see this, by the way, in the Ukraine fight today, where the Ukrainians are holding on valiantly against the Russian onslaught. But it's sort of mano a mano, man against man, sort of all of the stereotypes of war. So in a drone world, which is the fastest way to build new robots is to build drones, you'll be sitting in a command center in some office building connected by a network, and you'll be doing harm to the other side while you're drinking your coffee, right? That's a change in the logic of war, and it's applicable to both sides. I don't think anyone quite understands how war will change, but I will tell you that in the Russian-Ukraine war, you're seeing a new form of warfare being invented right now. Both sides have lots of drones. Tanks are no longer very useful. A $5,000 drone can kill a $5 million tank. So that's called the kill ratio. So basically it's drone on drone. And so now people are trying to figure out how to have one drone destroy the other drone. This will ultimately take over war and conflict in our world in total.
You mentioned raw models. This is a concept that I don't think people understand exists. The idea that there's some other model that's the raw model that is capable of much worse than the thing we play with on our computers every day.
It's important to establish how these things work. So the way these algorithms work is they have complicated training things where they suck all the information in.
There are models in the labs right now that nobody has released, and Schmidt is saying they can already discover cyber attacks that have never existed before. On top of that, a $5,000 drone can now kill a $5 million tank. That ratio changes everything about how conflicts happen, and AI is the engine behind all of it. This is not science fiction. This is what he is describing as the current situation. Now listen.
And of course, there's this company called NVIDIA, which makes the chips, which is now one of the most valuable companies in the world. Surprisingly, so incredibly successful because they're so central to this revolution, and good for Jensen and his team. So the important thing is when you do this training, it comes out with a raw model, right? It takes 6 months and you wait 24 hours a day, you can watch it. There's a measurement that they use called the loss function. When it gets to a certain number, they say, good enough. So then they go, what do we have? Right, what do we do? So the first thing is let's figure out what it knows. So they have a set of tests, and of course it knows all sorts of bad things, which they immediately then tell it not to answer. To me, the most interesting question is in over a 5-year period, these systems will learn things that we don't know they learn. How will you test for things that you don't know they know? The answer in the industry is that they have incredibly clever people who sit there and they literally fiddle with the networks and say, I'm going to see if it knows this. I'll see if it can do this. And then they make a list and they say, that's good. That's not so good, right? So all of these transformations. So for example, you can show it a picture of a website and it can generate the code to generate a website. All of those were not expected. They just happened. It's called emergent behavior.
Scary.
Scary, but exciting. And so far, the systems have held. The governments have worked well. These trust and safety groups are working. Here in the UK, 1 year ago was the first trust and safety conference. The government did a fantastic job. The team that was assembled was the best of all the country teams here in the UK. Now what's happening is these are happening around the world. The next one is in France in early February, and I expect a similarly good result.
Do you think we're going to have to guard these raw models with guns and tanks and machinery and stuff?
I worked for the Secretary of Defense for a while. In Google, you could spend 20% of your time on other things, so I worked for the Secretary of Defense to try to understand the US military. One of the things that we did is we visited a plutonium factory. Plutonium is incredibly dangerous and incredibly secret. And so this particular base is inside of another base. So you go through the first set of machine guns, and then you have a normal thing, and then you go into the special place with even more machines guns, and even because it's so secure. So the metaphor is, do you fundamentally believe that the computers that I'm talking about will be of such value and such danger that they'll have their own data center with their own guards, which of course might be computer guards. But the important thing is that it's so special that it has to be protected in the same way that we protect nuclear bombs and programming.
He just compared these AI models to plutonium, the kind of thing that needs to sit inside a base within a base, surrounded by machine guns, and his word for what these systems do when they learn things nobody taught them is emergent behavior. Scary but exciting, he said. I'm not sure exciting is the right word when you're also talking about protecting this stuff like nuclear material. Listen to this.
I wonder if this is the moment where humans couldn't see past around the corner. Because, I've heard you talk about how the AIs, they'll be agents and they'll be able to speak to each other and we won't be able to understand the language.
Well, I have a specific proposal on that. There are points where humans should assert control. And I've been trying to think about where are they. I'll give you an example. There's something called recursive self-improvement, where the system just keeps getting smarter and smarter and learning more and more things. If you don't know what it's learning, you should unplug it.
But we can't unplug them, can we?
Sure you can. There's a power plug and there's a circuit breaker. Go and turn the circuit breaker off. Another example, there is a scenario, theoretical, where the system is so powerful it can produce a new model faster than the previous model was checked. That's another intervention point. So in each of these cases, if agents, and the technical term is called agents, what they really are is large language models with memory, and you can begin to concatenate them. You can say, this model does this, and then it feeds into this, and so forth. You build very powerful decision systems, we believe. This is the thing that's occurring this year and next year. Everyone's doing them. They will arrive. The agents today speak in English. You can see what they're saying to each other. They are communicating what they're doing to English. But as long as they're human understandable. So the thought experiment is one of the agents says, I have a better idea. I'm going to communicate in my own language that I'm going to invent that only other agents understand. That's a good time to pull the plug.
AI agents are talking to each other right now, this year, and Schmidt says as long as it's in English, we're fine. But the moment one of them decides to switch to a private language only machines can read, that's the line. My issue with that is simple. Who actually pulls the plug? Because the companies building this are the same ones who would have to make that call, and they have hundreds of billions of dollars riding on not stopping. Listen.
What is your biggest fear about AI?
My actual fear is that we're not going to adopt it fast enough to solve the problems that affect everybody. And the reason is that if you look at everyone's everyday lives, what do they want? They want safety, they want healthcare, they want great schools for their kids. We just work on that for a while. Why don't we make people's lives just better because of AI? We have all these other interesting things. Why don't we have an AI teacher that works with existing teachers in the language of the kid, in the culture of the kid, to get the kid as smart as they possibly can? Why don't we have a doctor or doctor's assistant, really, that enables a human doctor to always know every possible best treatment, and then based on their current situation, what the inventory is, which country is, how their insurance works, what is the best way to treat that patient? Those are relatively achievable solutions. Why don't we have them? If you just did education and healthcare globally, the impact in terms of lifting human potential up would be so great, right, that it would change everything. It wouldn't solve the various other things that we complain about, this celebrity or this misbehavior or this conflict or even this war, but it would establish a level playing field of knowledge and opportunity at a global level that has been the dream for decades and decades and decades. Part of the reason is I and others have worked hard to get the governments to understand this. It's very strange. In my entire career, which has gone for 50 years, we've never asked for government for help, because asking the government for help is basically just a disaster in the view of the tech industry. In this case, the people who invented it collectively came to the same view that there need to be guardrails on this technology because of the potential for harm. The most obvious one is, how do I kill myself? Give me recipes to hurt other people, that kind of stuff. There's a whole community now in this part of the industry, which are called trust and safety groups. And what they do is they actually have humans test the system before it gets released to make sure the harm that it might have in it is suppressed. It literally won't answer the question.
When you play this forward in your brain, you've been in the tech industry for a long time. And from looking at your work, it feels like you're describing this as the most sort of transformative, potentially harmful technology that humans have really ever seen. Maybe alongside the nuclear bomb, I guess, but some would say even potentially worse because of the nature of the intelligence and its autonomy.
So the man who built Google, who has been inside AI research longer than most people have known what AI is, says his biggest fear is not the cyber attacks or the private agent languages or the emergent behavior nobody planned. His fear is that we waste the window, that we get distracted and miss the chance to actually use this for healthcare and education before everything else catches up. And he is optimistic, but he is also the same person who just compared these models to plutonium, described wars being run by drones from office buildings, and said agents inventing their own private language is the pull the plug moment. That combination should sit with you. Subscribe, because this is only getting harder to ignore.